Hi, everybody. I'm Joan Viscardi. I am the host of VISTV, and this year, 2022, which is coming near to a close, we have been focusing on wellness and how do individuals in all different types of performing all type of work skills take care of themselves. And I'm really excited today to have Jill Schock with me. Welcome, Jill. Jill is a death doula. And for the audience and myself, first, Jill, I'd like to ask you a little bit about what it is that actually means. What type of work do you do? Maybe even how did you get into it and what interested you in the first place to do the work you're doing?
Great. Okay, so I'll start with a definition just so everybody can orient themselves. So doula is a word. It's been around for quite some time. And it translates literally in English to a woman of service. Okay, so typically you would find women historically, guiding people into this world. You brought in the connection with the birth doulas. We're very much connected in several different ways, but one of them being we're present during major life transitions, which involves a physicality and an entering and leaving of the world. So we connect on that, and it is mostly women who work in the space as doulas, but that will probably change over time. So that's what the definition of a doula is. Okay. The reason I chose to use it was because I really do identify with being a doula, which is typically someone who's not attached to the clinical system. So I get paid out of pocket. I'm an extra charge. However, you hire me to be your advocate. I work directly for you. I don't get paid by Medicare. I am not under the policies of a Catholic hospital. I can do my job to the fullest. And I do come from a background in healthcare. I am a clinical chaplain. I went to divinity school and did all my chaplain training. So I worked in healthcare for many years. And there are just too many holes in the system that are tied up by bureaucracy that require help, assistance, a guide to tell you how to get through these systems and what you need. In particular, I work with end-of-life healthcare, so palliative and hospice care, and we do medical aid and dying here in California. And then on the other side, I work with the funeral industry, so funeral directors and the disposition of one's body. So that's the scope of my work, pre-planning all the way through what we do with your body and how we get you to say goodbye before you die. Pretty large scope.
Very large scope. And what's interesting is, as you and I spoke a little bit about, my last guest was Ana Jimenez, who was a birth worker. And it's very interesting that juxtaposed on the life cycle, we have individuals who really seem, from what I'm hearing and learning, to be very necessary in life cycle, yet we as a society do not include that in services of healthcare, nor do we necessarily plan for that in society. And that tends to let me think that causes complications for yourself, for your own work and providing services that you feel are necessary. Do you ever come up with roadblocks within the system itself? So before we talk about wellness, because I think it has a little bit to do with wellness, we can't take care of ourselves if we're coming up to roadblocks constantly in the work we do. So are there roadblocks to the work you do? Is it something that is accepted by healthcare workers and those that you're working with?
Yeah, so this is where advocacy and the integrity of the core of your advocacy drive. So how a doula shows up and works for their client is a big miss. Because I come from the healthcare system, I know that there are no roadblocks in the healthcare system. I know how to work that system. Over time, I've learned how to work the funeral system. And so really, we need to be people who can be non-attached to the healthcare system and advocate outside The roadblock came when I was in the healthcare system and I was unable to do my job for the fullest for the person who's experiencing death and dying, like persons experience birth. And during COVID, a lot of doulas everywhere got kicked out, of the system. So we started doing more digital work. But I think a lot of us also learned how to adapt in our advocacy and learn different ways to get back in. And so I'm already able to go back in and work with my clients. And I did work with people through COVID. So I think, that's as a doula where you need to hold that piece of integrity of, I am here to advocate. Roadblock, no way. We're going to find a way to help this person. That's exactly what they pay me to do. But it's hard to be an advocate. You get a lot of no's, and this is our policy, and you got to know the law. You got to know who's working where. You really got to know your audience.
That, it's very true. And wow, I'd love to have you personally just sit and chat with me outside of this segment. This is to focus on wellness, but you touched on an interesting point. As a nurse myself and a leader of a company of nurses who are in the system, who work to advocate for the individual injured worker, we do hit roadblocks. We hit jurisdictional roadblocks. We hit a lot of rules and regulations of a particular facility or healthcare system. So that causes a stress and strain. So take me then into either a day in the life of Jill, or what is it that you do at the beginning of your day before you meet with a client or clients? And how do you take care of yourself? How do you advocate for you, Jill, the death doula? How do you advocate for your own wellness?
Yeah, so I think this is something that I'm doing, like real-time research and real-time meditation on, because I know that the way that working 25 hours in a week is like working 60 hours a week for somebody who deals with emotional exchange and very heavy labors. Both birth and death doulas, what we do is physical, mental, spiritual, very emotional. And so we have to, cleanse, dump that energy. I don't really know the words, so this is kind of where it comes into some of the wellness space. So I have to design my own schedule in such a way where I know I cannot have more than 2 actively dying clients. And how do I know that? Well, I need to get very good at recognizing disease process. So for example, an easy one to tell maybe what the death timeline might be is like a pancreatic cancer diagnosis versus an end-stage Alzheimer's. I know that pancreatic cancer moves fast, and we do a lot of comfort support to the very end. But with end-stage Alzheimer's, this might be 2 years of decline because it's not actively working on their internal organs. So learning how to recognize disease and the timeline of disease was first in learning how my self-care practice. So this came with time.
And that's interesting to me, not to interrupt you.
Yeah.
That when I met with Anna, it was very similar. She spoke very much similarly on the emotional aspect of it, how many clients she could take on at one given time, and how much input spiritually, emotionally. It's taxing, I would assume, very taxing.
It's very real that we pay attention to this because, and we went back to that definition of a woman in service. If you really identify as a woman in service, you're in a patriarchal capitalist system. So the norms of structure and hours and productivity, you can't apply them to starting a business like this and upkeeping a person who does business like this. So, I do martial arts. That's like a really big thing for me. I read. I'm always reading books. I walk every day for myself and my dog. I curate my relationships. so that they are relationships of joy and happiness. And, that's all a part of the bigger picture. And, on the day-to-day, it's just about sticking to a routine, sticking to a flow, and staying focused.
Yeah, and how I'm fascinated, bewildered at how you maintain that during the scope of death. During the scope, you're not just your client, I'm sure, is not just the individual who's going through this process, but the family members and the significant others, loved ones who are all emotionally being impacted. Do you have any tools that you use in order to work with all of those people and to maintain your own self integrity and wellness?
Yeah, I use an intellectual tool. It's something called terror management theory. And so what that basically proves, this is like a sociological study done by a man named Sheldon Solomon. He's a professor at Skidmore College. And he wrote this book called The Worm at the Core, and it kind of guides you through what terror management theory is. So basically, we as humans have the special ability to be conscious, and therefore we are aware that life is finite, and this causes us to feel uncomfortable at the very least. And so we have certain coping mechanisms, and then, how the choices we make and how we act connected to that coping mechanisms. So when I'm involved with a dying person, the dying person's death anxiety and terror management is going to be high level. They literally need to learn how to die, just like a woman needs to learn how her body is going to give birth. And it's really not something you can experience before it happens. Same as birth. So we need to protect that space and calm that fear first and foremost. And then we kind of go to the circles, the inner circle, the outer circle, maybe another circle, depending on how loved this person is. We can go further out. But then you recognize, how are they managing their terror and their fear? And when I recognize that, because coping skills will go way up, we'll cling to the things that we believe. And, that's, people say they get in some of the worst fights over somebody's death or at the funeral. This is why everybody's ringing at the highest, at their highest self. And so knowing terror management theory for my clients, and then also myself, has been very helpful. So then I recognize when my coping mechanisms are coming into play and how I manage those, when I need to step back. Why does this case bother me more than others? Oh, because it's a young couple with a sudden cancer diagnosis. That's my biggest fear, so that having that tool really helps me quite a bit.
It sounds like you need it to be grounded.
Yeah.
You mentioned coping as a human, emotion, as is empathy. How do you protect yourself? Are you empathetic all the time and have just learned a way to accept that? Are you compartmentalizing that?
Both, I get better at, again, learning how to regulate, take care of myself. I'm just constantly learning how to do that. But, there is a term called compassion fatigue, which I think could definitely be tacked on to empathy. But ultimately, this is a very vulnerable population. And so I will never not have empathy for that. The dying are very overlooked. And so that's a part of, the principles of my practice, is protecting the vulnerable. So I don't run out of empathy for that. Sometimes I can get frustrated with people when I'm getting a little burned out. And because usually I just let people be themselves, and that's fine. That's, a part of my job. But yeah, so I just keep track of it and then pull back.
Wow, I can't tell you how much I can empathize with your clientele and feel their support of having you and their appreciation. we're lacking so much in society, in understanding death and making it part of the life cycle that is cherished and really recognized. So I really can't even imagine. Kudos to you. It's something I really hope society looks at deeper and deeper, and that's a discussion for another day. How do we get it accepted as part of medical practice? That's reimbursable by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, because if we could do that, everyone would be entitled to the gift of a death doula for sure.
Well, again, I go back to that piece of actually not wanting to be tied to Medicare, because if Medicare paid properly in the first place, hospice workers and palliative care workers wouldn't get burned out as often as they do. And so the system is not set up to support more. In fact, it can't even really support what it has now. And so I do think it's very important that we don't work for Medicare, because we're never going to get paid what we're worth, and then we'll just start being cycled and dropped through the system. If Medicare worked, I would still work in hospice and palliative care.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
But
it's a unique service, I think, a unique skill.
Yeah.
And I really, again, commend you for what you're doing. If you had to leave those who are tuned in to us with a couple tips on how to protect yourself emotionally in your work and be able to come back the next day feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, or ready to go, what would you say?
Move your energy. You need to physically, and whatever works for you. If you are someone that's working with heavier emotional topics, you must feel, the energetic presence they have in your body. And I would say locate that and move it. For me, it's walking. And I love also swimming in the ocean. I try to surf, but it's very hard. Different things that will tire my body. If I have to go to work the next day and I don't have the luxury of resting, then you have to tire yourself out. If being super physical isn't accessible to you, there's got to be a way. I can read myself tired. So just find some way to move that energy, I think.
That's a great tip. It almost is the opposite of what we innately think, intuitively think we should do, is tire ourselves out to come back to be tired again. But I think that's a great tip that I'll take myself. And I think the fact that you're walking and swimming, you're connecting with nature, which I think is so huge in wellness. What I'm learning this year through talking to a lot of people is get outside, get into nature.
Yes.
And we can find some peace there.
Oh, yes. Yes. I'm a gardener. So that's kind of one of my bigger things, touching earth, honoring earth, growing, also things, live and die.
I can see in your background 100%.
All of these plants have been propagated. I don't buy plants. So gardening is really fun, from seed to harvest, and you learn a lot from the earth and from nature about life and death.
Oh, isn't that true? Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I thank you, Jill. I looked forward so much to having you come on.
Thank you.